Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series. And our guest today, we have a long history with our guest today. When we first started the CEO series, he was our first or second guest. Longtime friend, international thought leader in the space of leadership and strategic thinking, Harvard Business School publishing moderator, HBR author, co-founder, and chief thought leader of platform leadership for connected leadership, strong team of professionals in shaping the future of countries globally. And I'm just so glad that you were able to carve some time out to do this 45-minute interview. So how you doing, man?
Very well, thank you, Ron. I'll be honest, I didn't know that I was, patient zero back in the day when you started the CEO series. So I'm very glad to see that you guys are doing well, and it's a phenomenal pleasure to be back once again. Thank you.
Yeah, we were kind of just starting out, but one of the reasons I wanted to bring you back, because now we've kind of earned our bones in talking through, but I wanted to bring in a high level leadership coach, leadership mentor, leadership developer across the globe. But there's always a journey behind that. So how did it start from? Walk us through the journey.
Well, mine was actually quite coincidental. I get the question a lot of times because, people look at me and I guess they observe success, and I have a PhD and I have a professorship and I have my own company, and I think people often look at it and they think to themselves that maybe I had it all planned out. I had a grand vision 20 years ago of some sort, and it's actually not the case. I stumbled upon most of the things that ended up bringing me here. As an undergrad, I studied theology. I had aspirations of entering the world of the church. Had a change of heart, not a change of heart, a change of mind, really. Always kept my faith, but I couldn't see myself going into the church. It was too constrained for me. I'm much more of a free thinker, flexible kind of individual. And then because I finished my studies with theology, I basically couldn't find a job anywhere. And I started to do sales, because I had to, make some money. And I was very good at it. I think maybe I just had one of those faces where people trusted me, so they bought my stuff, whatever it was that I was selling. And pretty soon, because I was so good at it, I became the guy in the company that had to tell the other salespeople how to sell. Okay. And then eventually ended up telling other companies how to sell. So kind of finding my feet into consulting, coincidentally, and then decided to take a little bit more serious, did an MBA, mid-90s, finished in 2000, and just upped the game. Started to enter more into the field of strategy and strategic advice. And I've basically been a strategy consultant now for almost 25 years, a long time, as you can see by the color of my beard. I see you got clever and you shave it all.
I got a few years too, but
so it ended up, but the shift into leadership came about because, in my lifetime, I've traveled to more than 50 countries, believe it or not, and I have countless companies. I've stopped counting long since. And one of the things that bothered me most, specific the first 10 years of this century, where my business was really expanding, was I would find myself in a position where phenomenal strategy session, phenomenal workshop, people afterwards almost being on a kind of, as we would say, kind of a high. And then, 2-3 years down the line, bump into the CEO again, or maybe one of the people that was involved in the strategy at the time. And then come to hear that very little of this phenomenal strategy plan was implemented. Yeah. And so I really started to do more and more research on that. Like, why is that? Is it just our human nature? Is it that we are all good at planning and very few good at implementation? And I in my studies discovered that it's not about the best strategic minds, but it is about leadership, and primarily through leadership, the operationalization of strategy. And that's when I discovered, strategy is great. It's a great plan. Peter Drucker said, even a good strategy not implemented is still a bad strategy. But most importantly, what you need for implementation is you need people. And the way to get to people, the way to get people to implement what it is that you want to achieve is you got to get them to trust you. You have to be inspirational. You have to connect with them. You have to talk about almost anything except the bottom line. And in doing that, you get the strategy implemented. So that's really where the shift, where I shift towards leadership. And at the end of the day, started what one can say a career in that. So my consulting is my favorite subject matter is still strategy, but the activity that I'm most involved with is leadership.
Yeah. Leadership and developing people. I read an article the other week about I think it was GE, not GE, but the company with all the engine problems. And they said they had moved to a financial leadership. They wanted numbers, numbers, numbers. But now they're realizing that it was people, 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 which is the same thing that you're talking about now.
Look, absolutely. I mean, the best case study and probably one of the most inspirational leaders to me is Satya Nadella. If you take the history of Microsoft, it's this. We tend to forget very quickly. Back in the 90s, Bill Gates was the founder of Microsoft. He was the wealthiest person on the planet. The internet was just kind of like bursting into our social lives and into our commercial lives. But there was a lot of newness there, and Microsoft was this phenomenon. This like wow, and had fantastic growth. And then in 2003, Gates hands over the reins to Steve Ballmer, and then for a period of about 10 years, nothing happens to the share price. No increase in market capitalization, and yet the time for picking was ripe because there wasn't such intense competition back then already. Competition only came 2007, 2008, and then we had the economic crisis, and so it was such a prime time for Microsoft to really own the market and scoop, and it didn't. And if you look at the case study, Obama's style was just, to drive target, and what he created in the process was this toxicity and competitiveness, this unhealthy competitiveness between his people in the organization, just like trampling on one another to get that bonus and to get the promotion. Satya Nadella takes over 2013 in the space of 3.5 years, I think it is, increased the market capitalization to 700 billion. And you go and look at what he did. He only shifted mindsets, from people that thought they knew everything to people that needs to learn everything, learn about themselves, learn about the others, learn about the market, go back onto the streets. There's a lot written about how he almost physically chased, people back into the streets to tell them to go and find out what it is that your customers really want. And so that's it. It remains such a classic case study for me. This guy, man, it was all people, it was all empathy. He was on his own learning journey as well with his son's illness, where he really started to realize the power of empathy, and he could take that personal lesson into the workplace. And there you have it. Microsoft just banged everybody else off the chart. So the people focus is, and it's not just, Ron, I hear it a lot, it's not just developing your people. It's about truly, authentically caring about your people, caring for people. We can quite easily shift, because development, you can quite easily shift. You can shift it to people like us, like you and me, run a program, and, Ron's company is going to do a program, Steyn's company is going to do a program on leadership. And then the CEO kind of steps away because somebody else needs to be trained and he or she's got more important things to do. But that's it's actually such a small part. That's just development. It's about the caring, and that I find, really makes such a key difference. And that's what Satya got right.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a C-level person the other week, and they said, yeah, we're going to do this big offsite. I said, okay, so give me the steps after the offsite. So what do you mean? I said, we're going to do offsite. We do offsite once a year. What are the steps after the offsite? What does the monthly look like? What does the quarterly look like? Yeah. And he was he had to think about that. So I'm thinking, CEO, you should have a vision for not a one-time event, but a yearly event.
Absolutely.
And driving that through. So when you look at you're the strategic expert, strategic advantage, cultural competency. Do you see kind of a roadmap versus the one time everybody goes in Monday and then the Wednesday and everybody's excited and they get back to work, work comes in and everything moves aside?
Yeah, I think there certainly has been a lot of shifts in what the primary building block of strategic competitiveness is. And one of the major shifts was first introduced 2007, 2008 through an article by Casadassis Massanel from Harvard Business School, where he started to shift the focus from this long-term, not being disrupted strategy, almost like a train track running across the desert, to organizational flexibility, where he introduced the concept of business model flexibility. Now, the key thing there is it's not actually the organization that is flexible. I mean, bricks and mortar, my supplier is in Hong Kong, my business is in New York. How's that flexible? The flexibility is actually in your people. Now, most of us, by our very nature, and I say most of us with respect, and I include myself in that, we say we're flexible, but we don't really like constant disruption. I always tell the story. I have a tub chair, leather tub chair that I bought in South Africa, my home country, and this is my chair. When I flew up to Dubai 10 years ago with my family, this chair came with me, and it's standing in the kitchen, and I sit on it at the end of the day because that's my relaxing time. I do some cooking. I'm not a great chef, but it's known as Dad's chair. When I get home and the dog is lying on the chair, the dog will automatically get off. It's like the dog knows, When my mother-in-law visits and she sits on the chair and I get back home after a long day, she will respectfully leave, So we're all kind of creatures of habit. We don't like constant disruption, and yet we preach agile leadership, flexibility, change mindset. It's a very difficult thing to achieve, because this flexibility that Casadassis Massanel was talking about was actually flexibility in your people. Now, if you want to achieve that, to have a track through the desert vision, there's no real disruption, there's no real increase in competitiveness. How difficult is it to lead? I mean, you basically just need to get to the front of the train and push start, and off you go. Passengers are happy, staff is happy, everything is going hunky-dory, you're going to be on time. But that's not the world anymore, and we all know that. So you have to create a culture for flexibility amongst your people. And it's not possible to do that. And research shows this over and over again. It's not possible to do that through decree or force or management. It is, however, possible to do that if you connect with your people, if you can be vulnerable as a leader and show them yourselves how sometimes it's constant disruption and need to be flexible, throws over your apple cart as well. Just be human, be one of them, still lead, but be human. And that's true leadership, and that's where the caring aspect comes in again. So to answer your question, I mean, those are the big shifts. I mean, cultural competence is all about increasing cultural competence in an organization so that you can increase your internal strategic competitiveness, and not always just rely on some fancy product or service out there, because those are so easy to be copied these days. So that's some of the major shifts.
What we're talking about is not really high level strategic thinking. It's just coming back to earth and trying to figure out, how do we connect? How do I connect with you? How do I connect with my team, C-suite, whatever it is?
No, you're so right. Because from an intelligence base, we have made great strides. I mean, if you just look at the development in technology, big data management, artificial intelligence, chat GPTs, we've made great strides. But leadership is still about connecting with people. It's not the smartest person in the room. It's not the person with the highest IQ. IQ does matter, but it's not. That's not the only criteria. I mean, there's three dimensions that we look at in leadership, and they all come from some sort of an intelligence coefficient. You have IQ, which is the gray matter up here, and some of us, have high, some of us not so high, but it's a kind of a default. Those are the cards that you dealt with. And then the second one is SQ. That's my social intelligence. What is my ability to lead a team, to authentically build relationships? And the third one is EQ, emotional intelligence. Am I in touch with my own emotions? Am I aware of my own shortcomings? And, am I willing to work at them? Now, those three, insofar as intelligences, spills directly over into three leadership dimensions, which is self, team, and organizational, the leadership dimensions. So you have to have all three, and then if you look at the research once again, people have always asked this question, despite the work of Daniel Coleman and explaining emotional intelligence and really introducing leadership as a management discipline back in the early 90s. people have always asked, what is this big thing about leadership? Why can't I just manage? Why can't I just crunch the numbers, sweat the assets?
Do this and it's done.
Exactly. And the thing is, the research shows over and over again is organizational performance is preceded by leadership performance, and leadership performance consists out of those three dimensions: self and team and organization. So there's no argument about it.
Yeah. As long as I've known you, I've never known the angle from theology. I've never known the angle for theology. So do you think is something rooted there that I was able to? So you've gone from there and you went into sales. My background, my first job out of university was sales at IBM, which was probably the best grounding ever for my side.
Yeah.
Because like one of the old sales guys told me, he said, the sale doesn't begin until a person says no. Then you find out who the salesperson is. I never forgot that. So let's go back to the anchor of theology. You're going to be in that realm.
Yeah.
Business. And I'm going to pull from the other side. And we're able to take you through that to where you are today.
I think, we all have three centers of decision making in our life. We have head, which is the intelligence part. We have heart, which is emotion, and then you have stomach, which is gut.
Yeah.
So any decision that you take, whether that's buying a motor car, whether that's taking on a new job, whether that's getting married, having kids, any decision that you take, you tend to have a stronger motivator in any of those three centers. And mine happens to be emotional. So by measurement and by diagnostic, I tend to lean heavier on emotions when it comes to decision making. Afterwards, I'll obviously rationalize it and put it through the gray stuff in the head. I'm not that good at gut, for instance. My wife, on the other side, if I can use I don't have a permission, but I'm sure she'll be okay with it. She's extremely good on gut. I mean, she can, people, we get people over for a barbecue and it's new people and they will leave at the end of the day. And my wife will say, something about that guy that's off, and I get like, what the hell? He's a good guy. I mean, I love this conversation. And every time she is right. So we have those three. And I think theology, because it's effectively a life of service, as a man of the cloth, is something that has a very strong emotional draw card. And that was what initially drove me to it. I wanted to do good. I wanted to serve in a structured manner, and basically wanted to play a role within the church institution. It is important to mention, so why not? Why did I not end up there? Unfortunately, my background, I come from South Africa, as you know, and the church at the time in the country that I grew up in was very closely associated with apartheid.
Okay.
Unfortunately, and it goes back to 1948, and the church basically institutionalized apartheid. And during my student years, I discovered a lot of truths about apartheid, which I was very ignorant of as a youngster, because I grew up as a white person in a bubble. So I didn't know about all these atrocities and wrongdoings that was committed by the oppressive apartheid government. So obviously I was hugely conflicted, during my second year, because I couldn't see myself continuing in the institution, but I didn't lose my faith.
Okay.
And I then decided to distance myself from the institution, but at least, finish some sort of a degree, which gave me the undergrad in theology. And I think, one might look at it as fair opposites, church versus business. But I'm not in the business for making money. I think I essentially I'm in the business because I still want to give. I still, my leadership training is all about just getting people to be better people, and better for their people, and increase their levels of care, and really change the world. And not talking about changing the world, not just people, but also planet. I recently did a trip to Penang island in Indonesia, and I was it was such a lovely day. We were out on the water and sort of in a very skimpy sort of boat. It looks like a skiff, the things that the pirates use. Sort of combing the coastline, and ended up on what looked from a distance to be an absolute pristine white beach. And they're disappointed when I put my foot on the sand with the amount of pollution, plastic pollution specifically. It was just heartbroken, and my wife made the comment. She said, wow, it's really sad that things don't seem to work here when it comes to this. And I said to her, you know what, it's not that it doesn't work, it's that somewhere up there's someone that doesn't care. These things are always preceded by care. If you really care, you care about the environment, you care about the next generation, you care about the youth, you care about planet, you will ultimately change your behavior.
Yeah.
So I think there's still a lot of theology heart in there somewhere, and just this notion to get people to just try and be better people, man.
Yeah,
I hope it makes sense.
that I understand exactly what you're talking about. In other words, connecting all of it. I've told someone the story, I think yesterday on a call. I flew into a country. I won't name the country. And my first time coming there, and I looked into the airport was a disaster. It looked like something was still in the 50s. But as I was pulling in, as we were pulling in on the tarmac, they must have had a line of 15 to 20 private jets. So how could you have private jets?
Yeah.
And that level of population?
Yeah.
And the airport looked like a dump.
Yeah.
And I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You look at those, because it just didn't connect. So what I wanted to ask you about is that you've kind of walked us through the cool side. How have you dealt with challenges that you face? You get to that roadblock, and I'm trying to figure out what's next. What do I do? Do I U-turn? Do I left, right, whatever?
Well, it's interesting that you asked me that question, because I mean, I've had my own what I call Volta as well in my life. It's a term that I stole from the movie industry. It's when you have that sudden twist, and you say to someone, I didn't see that coming. As for a long time, my success, unfortunately, created a stain that became a little bit situationally arrogant. I wasn't the first person to coin that term. It was first termed by Ron Thomas. He was the former CEO of what's his name, of Target. And I always used to get confused between Ron Thomas and Ron Johnson. And you are Ron Thomas and he's Ron Johnson. I always used to get confused between the two. Anyway, so I got he was the CEO at the time of the Target Group, and he said he was very successful, went to Apple, and Ron Johnson did very, very good at Apple, and he was instrumental in the Apple Store. And then he went to JCPenney, and he had such a strong belief in his ability that he even invested $50 million US of his own money into shares. And the business went bust. And they called him, they did a case study, and they called him over to one of the sessions at Harvard Business School to come and talk about successes and failures. And he said that what happened to him is he became situationally arrogant. So he coined the phrase. And what happens when you become situationally arrogant is there's three things you need in business to be successful. The external environment has got to throw you a little bit of luck. Okay, so we look at the external environment: politics, economy, social trend changes, technology, what's happening out there in the world. That's sort of the academic scanning thereof. But somewhere there, the stars has to favor you a little bit, and then or more than less. And then you have your team. You have an organization. The reason why people see you standing out is because someone is carrying you on their shoulders. And then there's you. So what happens sometimes is when you're so successful, you start to believe that it's all you. And that's what situational arrogance means. And I was incredibly successful 2008, 2009. I did a contract in Northern Sudan. And I was setting up a company for partners, Sudanese partners and South African partners. And I think that we had a South American involved as well. It was running it. It was a CEO contract for 2 years, setting up this company. And it just failed miserably. Nothing I did worked. And I couldn't. You're talking about challenges. I couldn't get it. For starters, I wasn't good at dealing with failure because my career was dependent on success. The business used to sell itself on my reputation, and I really struggled. And I was blaming everyone and everything. It's the culture, it's the language, it's the infrastructure. They arrive late in the room. All of that. It's everyone else, but except you. It's just never you. And I ended up going to a local doctor. It's a very well-recorded story. I actually wrote an article on it, got published in Harvard Business Review. It was my first article that I wrote for HBR. Ended up at a local practitioner because I fell ill, and I just went to him to get some pills or whatever. And there's this local Sudani that walks in, and he's very excited about his country. They're great people on the ground. They're just so kind and helpful and open-hearted. And he was telling me fantastic things about Sudan. And in the northeastern part, there's a tree that grows up to 1,000 years old. And at this time, this tree breaks in two, like the top part breaks off the bottom part, almost like an English gentleman lifting his top hat. So it doesn't split, it literally breaks off. And at that time, to his description, to quote him, he said the tree, if 10 grown men would hold hands like that, stretched out arms, that would be the circumference of the bottom of this tree. And in the rainy season, it catches water. So I'm sitting there and I'm going, yeah. You know what? I don't know why you're telling me this. I don't want to be here. I hate this country. Jabbery, I want to get my pills. I want to see the doctor, go back home and never come back again. And then he said something that really, it probably brought about the biggest challenge within me. But also, I think at the end of the day, changed my life significantly and helped me to really understand what it all is about. He said to me, so he referred to me as a Westerner, probably because of the color of my skin, not knowing that I'm from the African continent like him. And he said to me, they find Westerners like you they find their skeletons against a tree trunk because they got lost in the desert. And then when they look closely at the spore in the sand, they see that this skeleton, this person, was moving around the tree trunk all the time to stay out of the sun, not knowing that there's water on the inside. And that's when it dropped. Yeah. That's when I realized that I'm this skeleton. I'm in a country that I know nothing about. It was my first introduction into the Arab world. I know nothing about it. And yet I come here as if I know everything, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. And this is how we strategize. And this is the framework. And, we train from 8 to 5. And, just like, I'm not interested in your nonsense. This is how we do it. Yeah. Now in the West, that can be a very successful strategy because people look at you as being confident, assertive, self-assured, disciplined. You get a lot of very good characteristics to describe that. But in the Arab world, you're seen as arrogant. You're seen as not caring about them. You see as disinterested. So the curtain just goes down. I walk into the classroom, the curtain just goes down. And here's the funny thing. I went back to the board, and I because they called me my head role, and I begged them to keep me. And I said to them, gentlemen, I know why we are failing. I finally figured it out. We're failing because of me. Please keep me. So there was one of my, I think there was 8 or 9 of them, I can't recall. With one guy that sort of, he pitied me, I think, or maybe they couldn't find a replacement in time. I don't know, but they gave me a second chance. And all I did, Ron, is I just started to learn about people. I started I sit down, I wouldn't do all the talking. I really started to listen to them. I got invited to one of their homes for the first time. It was an Eid. I didn't even know what Eid was at the time. And I got invited there, and I had to sit on the floor, eat with my hands, share my meat with someone else. I mean, all of this was just like, so the Western world that I came from. I know. But it changed my life. And I realized then that I shouldn't be a teacher. I should be a learner. Wherever I go, every company, every individual that I engage with, I should be a learner. And I literally started to adopt that approach. And it made me a very, very wealthy man, not financially, but wealthy in I lead a wealthy life, a rich life, an enriched life. So that's the only challenge. Not the only. I had a lot of other challenges, but it's sort of something that I adopted. Even now, when I get to a stumbling block, I try to learn out of it. I try to figure out, okay, what went wrong where, and as long as I can get some sort of a learning lesson out of it, I'm okay. Sometimes the lesson comes in the same day. Sometimes it comes 6 months down the line. I'm a reflective learner by nature, and I ponder and ponder and ponder over things. But it's given me, I think a little bit of extra wisdom and insight. I enjoy the fact that life is not just smooth sailing. I enjoy the disruption. It's part of it, and that's where the learning lies.
Yeah, that was a key point for me when I moved from New York to Saudi Arabia. I was working with Xerox, one of the consulting firms, and I came over as the head of HR, and I don't want to say know it all, but I would say, well, one of the things we do in the U.S. and New York, we do it this way. And one of the old guys put me aside. He says, "You're not in New York anymore. You're not in U.S. anymore." He said, "Learn what this is about." So you talked about going and eating with your hands. You're talking about the culture.
Mm.
You're talking about what is it like to live in the country. So I had to step back, shut up, and listen more and learn more. And don't always perceive as this your background is going to bring you in, that's going to be here. In certain cultures that would work, but it did not work. So that kind of resonated with me, as you talk through that. So you're in the Middle East now. You're in the Middle East. You're one of the key thought leaders in the Middle East. You've talked through your leadership style and how it has evolved over the years. What do you see as the major challenges for companies today trying to get back on track? I know we've touched on a lot of different points.
I really think, and again, that's where, the book that I did on cultural competence comes into play is, I think sometimes when things are so disrupted and keeps on being disrupted, I think it's sometimes necessary. I understand this is probably going to sound like the wrong strategic advice, but to not just look externally all the time, but to kind of refocus internally. I remember as a youngster, I think 9 years old, Atari brought out a computer game called Pong. It was this two little, and it almost like, tennis. And the breakthrough at the time was this was the first computer game that had sound to it. It was like, wow, it was like a big thing. And I kind of I figured out very quickly that if you want to beat the computer, you got to play more and more and more and more and more. And I also figured out that, in that playing more, you are becoming better. The computer is still difficult. That thing moves up and down, and sometimes fast, sometimes slower. I mean, the environment is the environment. We can't think the environment into a different space. We shouldn't hope it into a different space. The environment's going to do what it's going to do. Politics are going to be politics. Technology changes are going to happen. Artificial intelligence and robotics are here to stay. Chat GPTs are infiltrated into university. It's here. So we can't think, wish that away. But what we can do is, I do think that we need to focus internally. Again, I think, companies should just sort of do a little bit of a clawback. And when they do that SWOT, don't just do a tick box exercise, but really look at strengths and try and look at strengths from a culturally competent perspective. We're sitting in the Middle East. You have 218 different nationalities in this part of the world, in a very small part of the world. Multiple nationalities and organizations, and that diversity is one of the most powerful tools that they have, because complexity has been proven over and over again is much better served through diversity than through expertise. We come from a stable era, 1970s, 80s. Yeah, give it to the expert, give it to the cleverest person in the room. Now you need multiple views, multiple dimensions. So I would certainly say that if companies are struggling, to not be too fearful of what's happening out there. Yes, be aware of it, but you should really make your decisions based on hope, not on fear, and not just an empty or emotional hope, but a hope that's based on your connection as people. If you change your internal DNA, if you've got a strong team, man, you can climb the mountain. It doesn't matter how difficult and how steep that is. There's a case study that we run through Harvard as well on Everest, and it's based on the tragic events in 1996, where there were 16 people that died trying to ascend to the top of the mountain. And you go and look at the movie, you do the simulation, you read the case study. Ron, unfortunately, it's just one thing that caused that, and that was not the mountain. It was not the weather, because that was a known. It was the inability to maneuver as a team. So my advice is really just connect. Again, internal, strengthen yourself internally. As an individual, you can go fast, but as a team, you can go far. And I think that's really what companies should be focusing on.
Okay, a question I wanted to ask you is that so you're branded as a leadership expert in this region across the globe because you have global clients. and you're imparting knowledge this way. How do you learn? Where does your inspiration come from learning? I mean, how does that work from your side? I mean, we all have our ways of, so here's my reading material for the day or whatever it would be. How does Professor Steyn say, you know what, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to immerse myself into something?
It's an interesting question because it wasn't always like this, and I don't know whether it's a function of age, but I've become very comfortable with disruption.
Okay.
This disruption is probably my single biggest source of learning, because I'm fortunate in the sense that I am a reflective learner. So when things get disrupted in the region, you take something like the recent floods in Dubai, and
Yeah.
you have massive disruption. I mean, you flew out, I flew out, massive disruption at
It
the
was,
airport. Where I find my inspiration from and what I learn from is I observe people, and there's a number of people that dealt fairly well with the disruption, and then there's a very large portion that dealt very poorly with the disruption. And I'm not talking about people that lost their houses or things. Let's just talk about being jammed at the airport. So
yeah.
let's have that as similarity in the population group for the sample. Most people would get angry. Most people would get irritated. Most people would start to vent. Most people would blame Emirates or whichever airline. Most people, that's a default because they do not like disruption.
Yeah.
It's not the fact that the suitcase is gone. It's the fact that it's disruption.
Yeah.
And fortunately, over time, I've learned to be calm about disruption, and I do sit down and I reflect and I ask myself, what happened there, and how can I maybe next time do it differently. I remember one time we got robbed at the pickpocketed at the airport in Spain, Mallorca, 6 years ago. Got off the plane and I had a bag and everything was in there. Passports, I exchanged money, 5,000 euros cash, everything was in there. And the trip was fine. Right at the end of the trip, just before day one of the holiday, a guy picks it, and we never saw it again. Got the passports back, but that was it. And I remember my son asked me about 2 days later, at that stage he was 17, so he just wants to punch this criminal up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he said to me, Dad, if you could catch this guy, what would you do to him?
Ooh.
And I said to him, if you asked me that question 2 days ago,
yeah,
I probably would have said, well, I would like to, just knock his lights out.
Yeah.
But it's now been 2 days and I've been thinking about this. And I can tell you what I'll do with him. I will not do a single thing to him because he's already done it to himself.
Yeah.
I mean, which life do you want? Do you want this life where, yes, your money is stolen, but hey, you're still living a good life? Wow. Or do you want to have a life where you're embedded in a criminal syndicate that you have no escape from, and you have to make your living by stealing from other people? Which life do you choose? So that's where I learn.
That's deep. Hold on for a second. That's deep. That's deep. Because I'm thinking I still want to throw it, but that's deep. Reflection point. Go ahead.
No, for sure. I mean, you still want justice done, but you realize, you just and that's how I learned. So where do I learn what from? We all have a sense of fairness, and I think that's ultimately what drives equality between people is our sense of fairness, and that sense of fairness is not always the same. So we have something like law, et cetera, to try and structure that. But I like to think a little bit deeper. I like to think differently about things. I don't just want to go into a societal construct and say, well, right, wrong, steal, punish. I don't like doing that because you got to, at the end of the day, it ended up being quite a long discussion with my son because I also said to him, listen, when you do something wrong, do you want me to punish you or do you want me to create an environment by which you can learn from your mistake?
Oh.
Because the second is much more difficult than the first one. The first one's easy, punish, ground your kid, take away the remote control, no TV for a week. That's easy. But to really get them to reflect and learn from their mistake, I mean, that's an entire different ballgame. Mm-hmm. So that's what I try and do, Ron. I think, in a nutshell, I think I get most of my inspiration from, disruption and when things go wrong out there, to sit and contemplate and try and get a learning lesson from it.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. I think governments, I think a whole lot of leaders across the globe, should learn from that. As we begin to close, as you reflect on your career, what are you most proud of and why?
You know, I was thinking about that question before today, and initially my answer was going to be the day that I got my professorship. It's probably just been such a emotionally explosive day that happens, because a professorship, as you know, you can't apply for it and you can't work for it. Somebody has to see you somewhere, nominate you to the Senate, and a lot of people with hats and togas need to decide whether this guy or lady, has got what it takes. That was going to be my initial answer, but truthfully, probably what I'm proudest of in my life, is that I have managed to raise the kind of kids that I have.
Oh,
My children, my son is in London. He finished pure maths, did a master's degree in it, and he now works and lives in London. My daughter's first year Maastricht, doing international law, and I've just spent time with them again last week. And I just, I flew back, and I just felt, wow. My son's behavior is sometimes of such a nature that even I would feel ashamed. I go like, wow, I wish I was like that. It's just,
yeah.
from a
I
values point of
want to be like
view.
you next
Yeah,
time.
from a values point of view, from caring for others, from just a neighborly love kind of, it's fantastic. And my daughter is the same, and it's just that probably, and obviously, I mean, it wasn't a solo flight. I didn't do that on my own, but that's probably the thing that I'm most proud of in
Wow.
my life, is to see
Wow.
how they have grown up, or what they have grown up into. And yeah, I just I really don't have anything else to add to that.
But that's powerful, because normally when you ask people like they may align it back to a career. Sometimes they will go back. One gentleman told me that of but what he was most proud of was spending time with his grandmother and grandfather, those kind of things. But it's a different kind of when you come back to something that's from the heart, as
Mm,
opposed to a business learning, my biggest promotion, or something like more. So I'll say more technical than more of a feeling inside,
mm,
you
mm,
know, in looking at that. So if you think about where you are today and the status you built, so I always say, you perceived at the top of the pyramid, you
mm.
know. What would be one piece of advice if you could go back to your younger self? So you're talking about theology, and you say, I'm going to try sales, and I'm going to. What would be one piece of advice that you would give to yourself? But I think the story you told your son about the package was kind of that's
Mm.
powerful. Yeah, but go ahead.
I think, Ron, and that's why I said earlier, I don't know whether it's a function of age that I got more peaceful with disruption, and I think about things longer. But and because you'll remember, I started when I said it wasn't always like that. I think if I could give myself one piece of advice, is I should have been more patient in my younger years. I used to be a little bit like a cowboy, and just sort of storming in where angels fear to tread.
Yeah,
And I could have made less mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes, and mistakes cost. In the business world, it costs you money. You lose time. You never get it back again.
yeah,
And then you have that unfortunate first emotional reaction to a mistake, and that is that you resent yourself and you're angry at yourself. And it's
yeah,
always a lot harder to forgive yourself and get over that. It's easier to forget other people, but to forgive yourself is, it takes more time, and it takes more out of you. So
mm,
so one piece of advice, I think I should have, it was as if I was always chasing right from the start, playing catch up, trying to fix things, and the next gig and the next this and the next that.
yeah,
And I think I could have certainly made less mistakes.
yeah.
So one piece of advice, I would have loved to have the patience that I have today as a 57-year-old. I would have loved to have that as a 27-year-old. That's
Yeah,
that's
but as my father would say, if I knew what I knew then, my mother would say, "No, don't even go there because you probably would be dead."
Isn't
Because he
that
would
true, huh?
he would use that same because she said, "No, no, no, just it was okay. You don't want to go there." So
Yeah.
one of the let me just do a quick shout out to some of our frequent listeners. Peter uh, Piccinini, he says, great way to start the morning. He's always a frequent listener every week. And he corrected me when I was talking about the airline. It was Boeing. finance based versus leadership based. And John Self, I'm going to be on his show tomorrow. He does guiding your careers in executive search. And my good buddy Jim Moy, who's a big shot attorney in Washington, D.C., he was my next door neighbor in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So we was going through this cultural thing he came from DC, I came from New York, and we'd have these discussions sometimes. It would go all over the place. So thank you folks for always, listening in. So one of the goals of the show, and for the people that join late, Professor Steyn and I have been friends for probably as long as I've been in Dubai. When we first started the CEO series, he was probably our first or second guest when it was being recorded. So we wanted to bring him back because he's doing cool things across the Middle East, across the globe. So one of our goals of the show, and the reason it was created, was to bring leaders on and talk about your journey, because I think with social media, we get this construct that it's easy navigating here, and it's not, as you talk through that. So I want to thank you for bringing that out, and we hope you enjoyed being a guest on the show. So are there any takeaways that you'd want to give us as we close out?
Well, I mean, other than, thank you very much. I mean, it's whenever I get invited for something like this, and it happens often, but I'll be honest, I'm always nervous before the time, because I still am humbled every time that people are actually interested to hear my story. We all have phenomenal stories. I recently, I had a fantastic accolade that was given to me. They named the top academic MBA student in my alma mater, Stellenbosch Business School. They named the award after me, and I was down there at the award ceremony, and I handed it over. And I also did the keynote. And in the keynote, I shared a little bit of my own journey with the university. And there was a professor that came to me afterwards. He's also into strategy. And he said to me, what he realized while he was listening to my story is, we all have stories, and we should really have, to have a platform where we could share these stories. And one of the things that, I really enjoy about the first time that I was on your show, and now again, Ron, and I'm sorry I got the surnames wrong, the Thomas and the Johnson. I mean, even today when I choose the case study, when I do the case study, I still talk about Ron Thomas, and then Marina, our CEO, would say to me, "It's Johnson. You're talking about the nice Ron."
Hold on for a sec. Hey, Marina, thanks for signing in. Thanks for listening in. Go.
So what I was saying is, and that's it. You should. The work that you guys do on this platform is really to create an opportunity for us to share our story. And I am truly humbled, always slightly nervous and a little bit emotional when there's people out there that want to hear your story, and your journey, and can take some learnings from it. In our line of work, learning has no full stop to it. It never ends, and not all of us grow into the category of wisdom. A lot of us get stuck on a knowledge level, and we kind of become fixed-minded as we grow older, and very much status quo, and things need to remain the same. And to have a growth mindset is great. And the thing is, what your series also does, and I want to really thank you for it, is you kind of make sure that people like me, don't get complacent. You kind of ensure that, okay, listen, let's put this guy to the test, and let's just get him in front of the cameras again, and ask him some questions, and hopefully he can come out with some pearls of wisdom. So that's some of my takeaways from the CEO series. Ron, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. As we begin to close out, we will do rebroadcast Wednesday, and we will do social and rebroadcast the entire show for people that could not get a chance to see it. So if you like the show, subscribe to the channel. We're growing, and thank you, everyone. Professor Steyn, stay on as we close out. So thank you, everyone. Have a great Friday.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Take the CEO series with you anywhere, anytime. All episodes are now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and major streaming platforms. It's not just an interview. It's a masterclass in leadership.